Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Watts. I am the Error Rate Lead with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability, and you are here for the Error Rate Training for Year 2 states on successfully completing reviews and the ACF-404 report. I do see people still coming in, so I will take a few minutes to just go over some logistical items. I do have a few friends here from the Office of Child Care Oversight and Accountability Division, Adi Fatur, Penny Job, and Linda Winings. And they will be here if they will be here in case there are any questions that I cannot answer. And we also, I see some names from some of the regional offices, so welcome to you too. And of course, welcome to all of the Year 2 states that have joined us. We have 90 minutes scheduled for today's training, but we might not use that whole time. It just kind of depends on how things go. I sent out the slides and a copy of the data collection instructions before the webinar about a half hour ago. These are also available to download in the GoToWebinar dashboard. If you do have, the DCI open, or if you have a copy of it printed, we will be looking at the chapter on the ACF-404 State Improper Payments Report, which is Chapter 7. If you can't look at it now and follow along with, the DCI here, you can obviously go back and look at it after the call. The webinar will be recorded, so you can access it later, or, excuse me, if you had a colleague that could not make it today, they can let me know and I'll send them the link to access the recording. And finally, if you have any questions or comments during our time together this afternoon, you can either click on the raise hand button or send a question in the Q&A box, and I'll try to address questions either as they come in or shortly thereafter. Right, quickly, here's the agenda for today. The bulk of our time will be spent walking through the items on the 404 report. And next, because the 404 report is submitted in the online data collection system, or OLDC, I'll spend a few minutes going through some tips on using it. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the OLDC because I think a lot of you are probably already familiar with it since you submitted the SDAP in the OLDC a few months or whenever you submitted it. And that's the same system, so I don't need to do a full-fledged training on the OLDC today. And we will close out with some next steps and TA available for the Year 2 states. And here we see the timeline for the cohort. We're almost to the second to last row. The State Improper Payments Report, or ACF-404, or just the 404 report, I call them all three. The last day to submit that is June 30th of 2024, which is a month from tomorrow. Now that date, June 30th, does fall on a Sunday this year, so you can submit it the next day on Monday, July 1st. All right, and finally, here is a list of frequently used acronyms. I'm not going to go through all of them right now. They're more here for you to reference later. But when I've used these acronyms in the webinar, I've tried to spell them out the first time on the slide. I may not have always done it, but I try to. But you will see us throwing some of these acronyms around today. All right, let's get into the main part of our webinar, which again is on completing the items in the 404 report. Right, the 404 report, or State Improper Payments Report, consists of 3 parts. First is the program assurances and certifications. Part 2 is the error measures, which are like the numbers, the quantitative measures. And then part 3 consists of some narrative response items. We'll start with part 1, which again is the program assurances and certifications section. Right, this is a screenshot from our ACF-404 template. The report template. This is just to show you what that section looks like. I'm not going to read it all here, but what you need to know is that in the OLDC, these fields that you're seeing on the bottom half of the page will be pre-populated for you. The certifier will just have to click on a link to e-sign when they submit. And even though this is part 1 of the report, the certification is actually the last thing to do before submission, after everything else has been entered and verified. One other thing to note is that sometimes some of the fields here show up blank. They don't pre-populate, especially like the fields for email address or phone number. If that happens, don't worry. We do have your information. Sometimes it just doesn't show up here. All right, so that's part 1. It's pretty straightforward. So we're going to move on to part 2, which is our error measures. And before we start diving into the items in part 2 of the 404 report, I want to take a step back and show you one of the elements that's in the record review worksheet. This is element 500. If you've been conducting reviews or you've been involved in training people to conduct reviews, this will look familiar to you. But if you are not as familiar with the record review worksheet, I'm going to quick explain this. For each case review that is completed, the reviewer enters their findings for the case into this part of the record review worksheet called Element 500 Case Summary. The reviewer writes a little narrative summary on the left side in column 1, and then on the right side in column 2, there's these 5 items to complete. In item 1, the reviewer records whether the case had any errors. In item 2, they record whether that error, if there was one, was caused by missing or insufficient documentation, or MID. Then we have a set of 5 items here, which I'm not going to go through in detail, but these just ask for a little bit of information about those MID errors, if there were any, and whether they were able to be mitigated through what we call an additional inquiry process. Item 3 is where the reviewer would record whether any errors in the case caused an overpayment or underpayment. Item 4 is the amount of the improper payment, if there was one. And then finally, item 5 is the total payment amount for the sample month. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because the information that the reviewers enter here in element 500 of record review worksheets forms the basis for many of the items that are completed in part 2 of this ACF-404 State Improper Payments report. So you will be reviewing and tallying up a lot of the figures that are recorded here. So when I'm walking through all of the 404 items in the next few slides, I will be referencing these items in element 500 quite a bit. So just wanted to give that context. And now I can start with the ACF-404 items. As I go through, I'll use some hypothetical numbers as examples. The first item is asking for the number of cases reviewed. And in this example state and in all states, this is going to be 276. Item 2 asks for the number of cases with an error. This refers to any error, not just improper payments. So these are the improper payment errors and the non-payment or administrative errors. To determine this figure, you are going to have to go into your record review worksheet, refer to element 500, and tally up the total number of cases that have a 1 entered in element 500, column 2, number 1. And we'll say that our state had 45 cases with an error. Then looking at item 3, this is the percentage of cases with an error. And at the bottom of the screen, I've given you the formula to determine this. It's just dividing item 2 by item 1. But you don't actually need to do this when you are completing the report. This is auto-calculated for you in the OLDC. So in our example state, the percentage of cases with an error was 16.3%. And I want to quickly show you how the auto-calculating, what it looks like in the OLDC. So I am going to bring onto the screen the OLDC. This is, if you're new to this year, this is how the 404 looks in the OLDC. I'm going down here to part 2, and I've already entered 276 for number of cases reviewed. And now I'm going to enter 45 cases with an error. Now notice that percentage in item 3, it doesn't show up automatically, but like I said, it is auto-calculated. You can just scroll kind of to the top of the page and hit save, and then you can see that percentage. And I will be pulling up this OLDC screen a few more times during this webinar to show you different things. But for now, I'm going to go back to the report item. The next one is item 4. And this asks for the total number of cases with an improper payment. And again, we're going to refer to your completed record review worksheet, element 500, column 2. And what we're looking for is the total number of cases that have a number other than 0 in item 4. This item 4 in element 500 of the record review worksheets is where that improper payment amount is captured. So if that amount's going to be anything other than 0, then that case would be included in the tally. And our example had 19 cases with an improper payment. Item 5 asks for the percentage of cases with an improper payment, which is determined by dividing the number of cases with an improper payment, item 4, by the total number of cases, which is item 1. And this is another item that is auto-calculated in the OLDC. Our state's percentage of cases with an improper payment was 6.88%. Oh, and I should throw in here for number 4, the total number of cases with an improper payment. If you had any mid or missing insufficient documentation errors that were mitigated, make sure that those are not included in that tally in item 4. All right, item 6 asks for the total number of cases with an improper payment error due to missing or insufficient documentation. And same as in item 4, we want to make sure that you are not including any mitigated errors in this count. So these are only the mid errors that actually did cause an improper payment. So you're going to tally up the number of cases that had a Y in element 500, column 2, number 2 of your record review worksheet, and also had a number other than 0 in number 4 of element 500 of your record review worksheets. So item 6 is basically like a subset of item 4. It's just those cases that have an improper payment that were caused by missing or insufficient documentation. Our example state had 8 cases with an improper payment error due to MID. Okay. All right, now we're going to get into a few additional items that dig deeper into missing or insufficient documentation errors. 7A asks for the total number of MID potential improper payment errors. So this is different from the last item. The last item asked about cases, the number of cases with a MID error. This is asking for the number of errors. So a case can have more than one error in it. So the figure that you will enter here can be found by summing up the figures in your record review worksheets, element 500, column 2, item 2A. And if we hop back to, let's see, oh, right, sorry, element 500, 2A, that is where the number of MID errors with an identified potential improper payment is recorded. So the figures for that item would be summed up for 7A. And we'll say that our example state had 10 MID potential improper payment errors. 7B represents the sum of the potential improper payments resulting from MID errors. So this is the dollar figure before any additional inquiry mitigation. And it's the sum of the figures recorded in element 500, column 2, number 2B of the record review worksheet. You would apply the pooling factor here if pooled funds were used. Our state identified $2,646 in potential improper payments resulting from MID errors. You might notice here and in all of the items throughout the report that ask for dollar amounts, everything is rounded to the nearest whole number. When working in the OLDC, if you enter dollars and cents, they will be automatically rounded for you. Item 8A is asking for the total number of MID potential improper payment errors that were mitigated using an additional inquiry. And this is found by summing up element 500, column 2, number 2D of your record review worksheets. In our example, there were 5 MID potential improper payment errors mitigated. And then 8B is the total dollar amounts that were mitigated. And this is the total of the figures recorded in element 500, column 2, number 2E of your record review worksheets. And here also you would apply the pooling factor if pooled funds were used. The state here had $1,245 of improper payments mitigated. 9A asks for the total number of MID errors resulting in an improper payment that could not be mitigated. So this is actually just what you entered in 7A minus what you entered in 8A. This is kind of what is left over after any mitigation. And that's going to be calculated in the OLDC. And then 9B is asking for the total dollar amount of MID improper payments that could not be mitigated. And this is 7B minus 8B, and it too is auto-calculated. So we have $1,401. in mid-improper payments. All right, that's the end of the mid items, and now we'll go back to thinking about all of your case review findings as a whole. Item 10 asks for the total amount of payments for the sampled cases. And this can be found again going back to your record review worksheet. Sum up the amounts entered in element 500, column 2, number 5. Apply the pooling factor if applicable. And we had $124,850 in payments for the sampled cases in our example. Item 11 is the total amount of improper payments for the review period, and this is the gross amount of underpayments and overpayments. This is going to be the sum of the amounts recorded in your record review worksheets, element 500, column 2, number 4. However, it is calculated automatically in the OLDC by summing up the totals for the next two items. So I'm going to jump forward to that. So items 10 and 11 are asking the amount of, items 11A and 11B are asking for the amount of underpayments and overpayments for the review period. And then these two are added together to get the amount for item 11 back in the last slide. Sorry if that was a little bit unclear. Item 11A is asking for the total amount of underpayments for the review period. And you'll find this by summing up the amounts in element 500, column 2, number 4 of the record review worksheet for the cases that have a U entered in element 500, column 2, number 3. Our example has $75 in underpayment. And in 11B, you'll do the same thing that you did in 11A, but for the overpayments. So sum up the amounts that were entered in element 500, column 2, number 4 of your record review worksheets for only those cases that have an O entered in element 500, column 2, number 3. Apply the pooling factor for both of these, 11A and 11B. The example state had $47.50 in overpayments, and then these two will get added together to get a total of, I'm going backwards, $48.25 in improper payments. All right, so this is 11A and 11B again. Now I'm going to move on to item 12. This is the percentage of the total amount of payments for the sampled cases that are improper payments. This is what we refer to as your error rate. It's a percentage of the dollars that were improper payments. It is auto-calculated. It's dividing item 11, which again is your total amount of improper payments, divided by item 10, which is your total amount of payments for the sampled cases. In our example state, that comes out to 3.86%. Now, as a side note, if this item would have been above 10%, then the state would be required to submit a corrective action plan. Item 13 is the average amount of improper payments. This is calculated by taking item 11 and dividing it by item 4. And item 4 is the number of cases with an improper payment. This is also auto-calculated in the OLDC. Moving on to 14A, this is your total amount of subsidy payments made using CCDF funds over the 12-month review period. And this is for all children, not just for the sample. I think states in their SDAP, one of the items asks about how you're going to find this number. So you can refer back to that if needed, but it's going to be a pretty big number since it's for the whole year. And in our state, we'll say about a little over 54 million. And then 14B is the estimated annual amount of improper payments. So for this figure, we take the error rate that we determined in item 12 and multiply it by the figure that was just entered in 14A. And this is another one where the math is done for you in the OLDC. And we end up with $2,094,062. All right, this is actually kind of the last of the math items. I don't see any questions, so I'm going to move on. There's a couple more items in part 2 of the 404 report. We have item 15, and this asks about the pooling factor. And you'll need to check, I'm not going to read all this, but you'll need to check either A, B, or C. If your review was based on a sample drawn from, or sorry, that was not drawn from pooled funds, then you'll check A. If your review was based on a sample drawn from pooled funds and you applied the pooling factor from your most recent ACF-404, then you'll check B. And we ask that you provide us with the number and percentage of cases that used pooled funds. And I think most of the time, the number and percentage of sampled cases that use pooled funds, it's just you applied them to all of them, right? So it'll be 276 cases, 100%. But that's not always the case. If your pooling factor was not applied to all sample cases, then you would need to complete B3, where you describe which cases had the pooling factor applied to it. And then finally, if your review was based on a sample drawn from pooled funds and the pooling factor was different from that on your most recent ACF-404, you'll check C and answer these 5 questions. You will provide us with that pooling factor and how you came up with it. And like in B, you'll give us the number and percentage of sampled cases that used pooled funds. And if all sampled cases did not use the pooling factor, you would describe in C5, that very last item. We do go back and look at your SSTAP where you describe the plans for the pooling factor. If we see some discrepancy there, then we, if kind of what you show here does not line up with what you had on the SSTAP, we do come back and just ask you, why is it different? So if you know now that, there was a change in how things were done, you can go ahead and get in touch with your regional office ahead of time to let them know. And that might save us some time down the road when we're reviewing your report. And item 16 on the ACF-404 asks for some information on any replacement cases that were used. And as a reminder, you must receive approval from the regional office before using a replacement case. If you did use replacement cases, just please double check that you have that approval from the regional office. If you don't, then please reach out to your regional program specialist as soon as possible. Otherwise, this might delay us in being able to review and approve your 404 report. If you look at a template in the DCI, I think it has all of the months listed. For the sake of space, I only showed October and November here. But we will just say that our state had a replacement case in October because it was discovered that there was no payment made in the sample month. And there was one case. Now, when you're in the OLDC, there is space. I'll pull up the OLDC again to show you. So I'm highlighting right now I'm trying to highlight the replacement case item. There's actually going to be a drop down for your month of the replacement case. Then there's a drop down for your reason. And there's a few that are kind of pre-populated. There's natural disaster, fraud, appeal, or other. So if you pick other, then you would go ahead and type it in this other comment box. And you would enter the number of times it was used. If you have more than 1 month where there were replacement cases or more than one reason within a month, you can add rows right under here. Okay, and if you make a mistake and you need to delete a row, you can just click on this button and click here where it says delete marked rows. All right, so that's how you add replacement cases in the OLDC report. Okay, I don't see any other questions on 1 through 16, so I'll move to part 3, which is the narrative responses. This section gives you an opportunity to tell us what happened during the error rate review. So what you found, what kinds of errors you found, what did you learn, and what are you going to do going forward? And your responses are really helpful for us. The information that you share helps us to improve our training and technical assistance. And we also use the information in our federal reporting about the national error rate. So we always appreciate, clear and detailed responses here because we do use this information. The first of the narrative items, 17, asks the following. Describe lessons learned or improvements made in implementation of the review process during the current review cycle. And some things you can do here is describe what you learned as you implemented your SDAP. What did you do in this cycle that was maybe different from the last one? Anything that might have changed as a result of things that you learned? Anything that was unexpected, and so on. Be detailed here, and you can discuss challenges, but you can also view this as an opportunity to spotlight your work and tell us what went well. Feel free to brag a bit if, a lot of good things are going on. In item 18, you'll be providing some information about the potential improper payment errors due to missing or insufficient documentation. And you must provide this information for all potential improper payment errors due to MID, regardless of whether an additional inquiry was used and regardless of whether the error was mitigated. And there's a lot going on in this item, but everything can be easily pulled from your MID tables. All right, so if you had any MID potential improper payment errors, you would have completed a MID table for that case. To complete item 18, you're going to want to gather all of those MID tables, and you're going to kind of compile that information. Item 18 appears as a table, and there are columns A through F. Column A is just where you would record the element number where the MID potential improper payment error was found. Column B asks, what was the MID? Your responses here can be pulled from column 2 on your MID table. And that on the MID tables, that says, describe what was missing or insufficient. So whatever you wrote in column 2 of your MID table, you can just copy and paste it over to column B for item 18. All right, column C asks for the dollar amount of the potential improper payment, and this corresponds to column 3 in the mid-tables. And D corresponds to columns 4, 5, and 6 of the mid-tables. Column 4 in the mid-table is just like a yes or no question. Was there, whether it was an additional inquiry used? And then you would describe why not in column 5 if you didn't use an additional inquiry. And if you did use an additional inquiry, you describe what you did in column 6. So you would just take those, pull those responses out of the table and copy and paste them here in column D. Column E is the amount mitigated, which corresponds to column 8 of the mid-table. And then finally, column F asks you to explain how you determined whether or not the potential improper payment could be mitigated. And that can be pulled from column 9 of your mid-table. So I'm going to show you a couple examples to illustrate what I just described. First, let's pretend that one of our worksheets had a potential improper payment error caused by MID in element 330. The child's citizenship verification was missing. The potential improper payment was $510. Then moving to column D, yes, an additional inquiry was used. That was pulled from column 4 of the mid-table. And then the description was taken from column 6, contacted vital records. In column E, the entire dollar amount of $510 was mitigated. And then here in column F, there's a brief description that vital records were able to provide the birth certificate. And one more example, and I won't read through it all, but this is just, in this example, the state did not conduct an additional inquiry, as you can see in column D. So in this case, columns E and F were left blank. If there's no additional inquiry, you do not need to do columns E or F on this table. And similarly to the item on replacement cases, when you're working in the OLDC, there is a button to add additional rows to this table, and you can also delete rows if you added something in error. All right, before we move on to item 19, I want to draw your attention to this big yellow box here. Please double check to make sure that all of your MID potential improper payment errors are included in item 18. The number of lines that you enter here should equal whatever figure you entered back in item 7A. So 7A, if we go back a few slides, I just want to show what that one is. 7A is the total number of MID errors with identified potential improper payments. So if you have, 10 identified potential improper payments caused by MID, then there are going to be 10 rows entered in item 18. I'll go back over to 18. And then the counts for number of rows with mitigated errors and non-mitigated errors, the number of rows you have for those are going to equal the figures you entered back in 8A and 9A. All right, so please refer back to the slide when you are completing your report and just double check this stuff before you submit. I know it's a bit tricky to make sure everything lines up, and sometimes we end up sending it back to the state because it doesn't line up. So if you have any questions, let us know. We're happy to take a quick look at it before you hit the submit button on your 404, just to make sure everything looks good. All right, in item 19, you're asked to identify all improper payment error causes. And for each cause, you tell us what it is, you give us the number of cases with that, an example, and whether it was caused by missing or insufficient documentation. And let's show an example. So this item is presented as a table with each row representing one error cause. The first error cause in our example is income miscalculation. There were 12 cases with this error, and there's a brief example of this error cause. All sources of income were not included. And no, this error was not caused by missing documentation or insufficient documentation. Next cause is missing work verification that had 8 cases caused by MID. And then we have missing income verification, 7 cases also caused by MID. And Crystal, I will get to your question in just a minute. We have a few very important tips on completing item 19. All right, so again, you're going to be listing out your error causes and telling us how many cases you had with each error cause. Make sure that for missing or insufficient documentation errors, that the causes are like separated out. Sometimes we see in item 19, the state will just say missing documentation is the error cause, and they're kind of like all collapsed together. But we want you to separate them into like specifically what was missing. So like on the last slide, the state had missing work verification, missing income verification. They're listed separately, right? So make sure that you don't have all MID cases kind of lumped together in item 19. Also, you'll need to do some cross-checking here just to make sure that all errors are accounted for. So the sum of column 2 in this item for the MID error should match what you entered back in 9A. And they should also match up with the number of rows that you have in item 18 for non-mitigated errors. And the sum of all of your cases in column 2 of item 18. So again, I'm going to go back really quick. So summing up these numbers, 12 plus 8 plus 7, that result needs to be either greater than or equal to what you have entered back in item 4 of the report, which asks how many improper payment cases do you have. So yeah, again, I know this might not all like make sense because I'm throwing out a lot of figures and everything, but just take a look. You can reference the slide later while you are completing your report, and just hopefully it'll make a bit more sense once you have everything in front of you. And again, you know, your error rate specialist here at the subsidy center is happy to help make sure that everything lines up before you submit. All right, so really, let's see. Yeah, we had a question come in from Crystal, Crystal Gebhardt. And the question is there a way to upload a spreadsheet for item 18? And again, item 18 is the one where you're listing out all of the MID errors. And it can be like, if you have like quite a few MID errors or potential MID errors, it can be a pain, right, to have to enter each of them separately. So I definitely understand your question, Crystal. I am going to actually turn that question over. Sorry for putting you on the spot, Adi. If you have any thoughts on that.
We won't be able to accept a document as part of the 404 report submission, but I do think we should talk offline prior to the submission of the 404 to see if there's any way we can work together with OCC and TA and you, and maybe add supplemental information if that might help support our review. So thanks for bringing that up, and let's check in again before that submission.
Sure. All right, thanks, Adi. I couldn't remember if that was an option or not. So yeah, we can follow up, Crystal, offline and kind of touch base about that and see if there's some way we can help you get all that into the OLDC table. All right, moving on to item 20. This again asks for a list of all your error causes. And here you're going to give your plans for reducing error. You'll describe your planned action steps, the timeline for implementing the action steps, and the method or methods that will be used to measure progress and impact of the action steps. All right. So this is the item, and then in the next slide, again, I have it kind of set up as a table, which is how it looks in the OLDC. The first column is just numbering the errors. And the next column, cause of error, will auto-populate based on your response to item 19. If you don't see it auto-populated, remember you can click that Save button in the OLDC, and then it should come up then. In the next column, action steps, here we ask that you share some specific activities that you're going to plan to help reduce the error. If you have multiple action steps for an error cause, you may want to number them, as you can see here. And we actually really like when you number them because it makes your response look a lot cleaner and easier for us to read. So here the state has identified 3 specific action steps to address the income calculation errors. In the next column, which is timeline, we want you to share when the action steps will be taken and when you anticipate they'll be complete. If you have multiple action steps, please use numbering again to ensure that they align with what was entered in the previous column, as you can see here. And then finally, in the column for progress measurement, describe how you'll track both the completion of your action steps and whether they are having the desired effect in reducing your error. And again, you can use a numbering system just to make sure that everything is neat and clear and lines up. All right, so I will give you a moment to look at this. And really, we can't emphasize enough how helpful it is when these things are numbered. For our end, it's really helpful. So I have it written out again here in this slide. These are just some tips on completing item 20. Just ensure that your action steps are directly tied to the error cause. And ensure that your timeline and progress measurements all tie back to your action steps and error cause. So try to be specific here as possible. Sometimes we go back and just ask the state to just be a little bit more specific with how they're presenting this information. And also, if any of your errors were also one of your error causes from last cycle, so if you're still kind of having the same errors repeat, just make sure you think about what you might do differently this time around to address them. For 21A, enter the amount of improper payments that the state expects to recover as a result of the review. If the amount that you expect to recover is less than the amount of your overpayments, which is 11B, then provide a summary of the reasons limiting the collections. So when determining your estimates for recovery, just a few things to think about. You might want to think about your history of collecting overpayments and any laws you might have that limit the collection amount. one more thing. In 21A, the amount given here, it should not be greater than your total amount of overpayments in item 11B. So when we talk about collection, we are only talking about recovering overpayments that were identified in this report. And in 21B, you'll enter the amount that was collected as a result of the previous review. And if it was less than the amount that you expected to recover, then describe why. So you will need to refer to item 21A on your 2021 report, the report from 3 years ago, to see what that expected amount was. And the amount that you'll be entering here in 21B, it should not exceed the amount entered in 11B of your 2021 report. Again, we are just interested in the amount of overpayments from the last review that were recovered. We're not asking you to tell us, everything that was recovered the whole year or whatever. All right. Item 22 is where you will describe your information systems and other infrastructure that assist in identifying and reducing improper payments. So we're thinking here about systems that help with eligibility, such as those that interface with other programs. You can also think about automated systems that profile and highlight potential improper payments or errors, or that have the capability for ongoing reports, ad hoc reports, eligibility worker alerts. Anything along those lines is really helpful to include in your description. You can also describe any limitations that you have with your current technology and any plans that you have to acquire additional systems or upgrade what you already have. Right, item 23. Here you will provide, and this is another item that has just a lot of information. Here you will provide your findings and targets for the current cycle and your last cycle, and also future targets for a series of error measures, including percentage of cases with an error, percentage of cases with an improper payment, percentage of improper payments, average amount of improper payments, and estimated annual amount of improper payments. So this, again, it's a lot of data, but most of it is going to be set up for you. So I'll show you that in the next slide. I know there's a tip here at the bottom right. I'm going to address that actually in the next slide, so you can see more clearly what I'm talking about. But here's the table with those error measures listed on the left. And I don't have the whole table filled in here, but I just wanted to highlight that the columns for prior cycle data, prior cycle target, and current cycle target will all auto-populate for you. They'll all show up just based on what was entered in your report from 3 years ago. So you don't need to enter that. And the current cycle data will actually also auto-populate based on what you entered back in part 2 of this report. So you don't have to enter that column either. The only column where you actually do have to enter data would be this very last column, your target for next cycle. And just a couple of things to keep in mind as you set those targets. First, thinking about that fourth target, the second one from the bottom, that is your average amount of improper payments. And we understand that this average may not necessarily go down from cycle to cycle. If your lead agency is maybe having more funding coming in, you're raising payment rates for your providers, it may be the case where your average amount of an improper payment is not going to be going down. So, we understand that, and we, ask that you do take that into account when coming up with your target. And second, we often do go back to states to ask them how they calculated this last target, which is your target for your estimated annual amount of improper payment. So one way to think about it is taking that third target, the error rate target, which in this example is 1.5%, and multiplying it by your annual amount of payments. And that will kind of generate an estimate for your annual amount of improper payments. And we know you don't necessarily know what your annual amount of payments is going to be in 3 years when you actually are, doing your reviews again. But if you can think of like a ballpark figure, or you could use this year's annual amount of payments, that can kind of be like proxy. Doing that multiplication here can kind of help come up with your estimate for your target for annual amount of improper payments. So I guess what I'm kind of getting here is that there should be some logic behind how you came up with this last figure. And that's what I have. I go back to the previous slide. That's what I have in this yellow box here. I have that little formula at the bottom, so you can refer back to that. Don't see any questions on that, but you can let us know if you do have any. And also still thinking about the targets. In item 24, you'll be comparing your current cycle data to the current cycle targets. If any were not met, let us know which ones were not met and describe why they weren't met. Also refer to the action steps that were described in item 20, and how specifically will those action steps be used to address the areas where the targets were not met here. If you did meet all your targets, that's great. You can just, say NA or whatever for this item. And the last item in the 404 report is 25. And here you're going to be thinking back to the improper payment error causes identified in the last report from 3 years ago. You'll describe the action steps that were taken, whether the action steps reduced the error cause, how the progress was measured, and any barriers to the effectiveness of the action steps. All right, and this is yet another item that is set up like a table. And let's see, I'm going to show what this is going to look like in the OLDC, actually. One moment. All right, so going to the bottom, when you are completing this item in the OLDC, this first box, it should auto-populate with the error cause. If not, you can let us know, and we will either, fix whatever's causing it not to show up, or you can manually put them in based on what your errors were last cycle. And then similarly to the other items with tables, there's going to be a drop down here where you can add additional rows, and you can also delete rows if needed. All right, so I wanted to show you that. I'm going to take you actually back into the OLDC in just a moment, but I wanted to show more of an example here of what what you're expected to enter here. Again, this should auto-populate. The next column, think about what action steps were planned. So you might want to look at your report from 3 years ago, item 20, as kind of a starting point. But if you have additional action steps that were taken that weren't included in the report from 3 years ago, you can include those here as well. So what action steps did you actually take, basically? You know, were they implemented fully, or was progress made toward full implementation? And then how did you measure your progress in reducing the identified, Yes, for the next column is just asking, did the action steps reduce the identified errors? And here you can just simply say yes or no. You're welcome to say more if you want, but you don't have to. All right, and then in the next column, how did you measure your progress in reducing the identified errors? Again, you can use your 404 report from 3 years ago as a starting point, because you did share in item 20, 3 years ago, what were your plans for measurement? So, you know, you can let us know here, did you actually measure that way, or did you do something else? And then finally, describe any barriers or setbacks in implementing the action steps. Or maybe, you know, you did implement things, but you didn't see the intended results. You can say that here as well. If you did not have any barriers, then you can just simply say none. You don't need to, you know, elaborate further. Okay. Now I am going to go back to the OLDC for a moment. And I wanted to show you a couple more things. When everything has been entered, you're going to want to click here at the bottom where it says validate. And at that point, you will get a list of anything that, like anything that was done incorrectly. And once that's all been addressed, then you will be able to certify. There'll be another button that shows up here for certify. And then after certification, you do that e-signing, then you can go ahead and submit. There is also a space here for attachments. I don't think anyone's going to have any attachments, but just, you know, that is in there. And these buttons are showing up at the top as well. So now at this time, we're going to stick with the topic of the OLDC, but I did want to give a few more pointers in it. Lead agency should already have access to the OLDC because of the STAP. You already submitted that. But we do ask that, you know, if you already have an account and you're planning to go into work on the 404, please test your access as soon as possible. So if there's any issues, you know, we can deal with those and fix them well in advance of our June 30th deadline. You may need to reset your password if you haven't logged in a while. Hopefully that'll be the only issue that you have. If there's anyone new that will need access, I've included the request form with the handouts for this webinar. And once that's completed, you know, if you need any help completing it, you can let us know. But it gets sent off to the ACF regional office, and they will go ahead and get that access set up. Also, if you know you need to change someone's permissions, like someone previously didn't have the permission to submit, but you want them to have it now, again, you can reach out to the regional office and they can help you with that. We do highly recommend having a backup person that's able to certify and submit, just because, you know, we know the summertime, people go on vacation sometimes. We don't want there to be a situation where, your designee is not able to get in and do what they need to do to, to finish the report, to get it submitted. It's just always a good idea to have a backup. It's not required, but we highly recommend it. Here's the address to access the website. And then if you require any assistance with using the OLDC, you can reach out to your error rate specialist, which I'll give you their contact information at the end of this webinar. For more technical matters, there is an OLDC help desk, and there's an email and a phone number, and you can go to them for the more technical stuff. Right, here's a few tips for using the OLDC. These are just general tips, things that we've kind of come across over the years. Make sure that you save your work often. I showed the save button that's at the bottom and the top of the page in the OLDC. The work is not saved automatically, and we just don't want you to enter everything and then somehow lose it all. We do recommend having a backup copy of your 404 report in a Word document. Just again, if something, really big happens in the OLDC, it's good to have that backup. And also you can kind of do that Word version first and then just copy and paste, your responses into the OLDC. When you go into the system, you get to pick what reporting period you want to enter your report in, and this is the correct one here on the screen. It's 10/1/2022 to 9/30/2023. So please double check to make sure that you're putting it in the right one, because if you put it in the wrong one, you're going to have to go back and redo it all, and we really don't want that to happen. Next, we have warnings versus errors. So I think I mentioned when I showed you the OLDC screen, there's a little button that says validate that you're going to have to press before you certify. And if there are any issues, they'll show up as either warnings or errors. If you get warnings, we want you to obviously look at them and address them, but the report can still be submitted. Sometimes there's just little quirks in the system that they don't like something, but it really was done okay, so you can go ahead and submit. If there's errors though, that's a bigger issue where something is not right. So those do need to be fixed before you can submit. And then finally, the last box on the right, once you've submitted it and you need to make changes, that's fine. But when it is in review, it will be locked for edits. So at that point, you can't go in and change anything. If something big comes up and you need to change it, obviously you can reach out to us and we'll try and help you, but you can't go in and do it yourself. Now, after we review it, if any additional changes need to be made, if there's things we need you to fix, the report will show up as being rejected, which I know it sounds really harsh, but that's just the terminology they use. And once it's been rejected, then the designee will need to unsubmit and uncertify it, make your changes, and then you recertify and resubmit. So we always get questions about okay, I need to make edits on my report. What do I do? That's kind of the process where it gets rejected, uncertify, unsubmit, and then recertify, resubmit. All right, as you begin to fill out your 404 reports over the next few weeks, there are lots of ways that we can offer support. Here are some of them. First, we will be holding office hours in the next few weeks. Once we get it scheduled, we'll send out an invite, so look for that in the next few days or week. Office hours are an informal session. You can just drop in and ask questions. I don't present anything new here. It's just, they're kind of there if you need me. If you don't have any questions, you can still join in just to listen. You can just drop it. We'll schedule an hour and you can just drop in anytime. Next, our TA team can review your draft 404 before you submit. And in fact, we highly recommend this. If there's any issues, we, can kind of catch those before you officially submit. And your report usually ends up getting approved much quicker. So if you wish to send in a draft, we just ask that you give us a few days to review it. The third line here is that we offer what we call a just-in-time training. And this is the one-on-one TA session on completing your report and entering it into the OLDC. We schedule about an hour, and it's pretty informal. The time can be used really just any way that, we can assist you one-on-one. We can discuss your 404 responses and assist you with completing the report, especially those trickier items. Or we can use the time more for just, navigating the OLDC, entering your responses. If you think this would be helpful, please reach out to your error rate specialist and we can get that scheduled. If you don't think that you need a whole just-in-time training, but you do run into some questions while you're completing or entering your report, again, you can contact your regional office to request TA and we'll help you. Right, here's your next steps. Request OLDC logins if needed. If you already have your logins, please test your access to make sure you're able to get into the system okay. Complete your report, request TA if needed, and of course submit by June 30th, which is actually July 1st because June 30th is on a Sunday. I don't see any questions, but I will hang out for another minute or so. But this is just our contact information for your error rate specialist by region. And if you have any more general questions just about the webinar, if you want the recording or anything like that, you can reach out to me, Katie Watts. I did actually just get a question that came in. Can multiple people fill in different areas of the same 404 that will be submitted? Yeah, I don't think that would be a problem, Laura. I've never attempted it myself, but I think as long as you are making sure to go in at different times and save it every time, it should not be an issue. So that's a good question because I know that in a lot of states there's multiple people working on the report. And just one more thing, I'm going to close out the webinar in a moment. We'll end a little bit early, but there is going to be an evaluation that comes up, and you can, we really always appreciate the feedback. It helps us make our webinars better going forward. So we appreciate any and all feedback, and you can also use that to request any TA in the comment section. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we obviously look forward to working with all of you over the next month to get your reports submitted successfully. Good luck with everything, and you know how to reach us, and take very good care, all of you. Bye-bye.